She didn't come back. And for a while I thought that meant I had lost something essential, that her absence was proof that I had failed to hold her attention, that my silence had turned into emptiness. But as the noise of confusion faded, I realized something deeper. Sometimes life removes people not to weaken you, but to show you the weight of your own strength. What you call rejection is often the universe correcting your alignment. You think you've been left behind, but in truth you've been pulled forward. That's how growth disguises itself, through pain that looks like loss and silence that feels like punishment. The moment she walked away, the air around me changed. Not immediately, not dramatically, but slowly, like dawn creeping into a dark room. It wasn't peace, not yet. It was awareness, the kind that strips you bare and forces you to face yourself without the mirrors that love creates. When someone leaves, they take with them the reflection you once saw yourself through. You are forced to see what remains when no one is watching. That's the beginning of strength. Strength doesn't start when you move on. It starts when you stop pretending you're broken. It begins in the quiet moments, when you realize that silence isn't a void, but a teacher. When you begin to see that what hurts is not her absence, but your dependency on her presence. You start to notice how much of your peace depended on someone else's attention, how much of your worth was tied to being chosen. The realization cuts deep because it reveals how fragile your identity was, how built it was on external validation. You start to understand that the real battle isn't about forgetting someone. It's about confronting the illusion that you needed them to be whole. In that confrontation, a transformation begins. At first, it feels cruel. Your ego screams for answers. Your mind rewinds every memory. Your emotions twist into contradictions. Love mixed with resentment, longing mixed with pride. But through the chaos, something subtle happens. You start to become less reactive. The silence that once felt unbearable begins to feel sacred. You stop checking your phone. You stop replaying scenarios. You stop asking why. And that's when you start winning, not against her, but against yourself. You win when you stop negotiating your value with someone else's behavior. You win when you no longer need closure to move on. You win when you can look at what happened and say, she didn't come back and that's okay. Because strength isn't built by what stays. It's revealed by what leaves. She left. And in doing so, she gave you a gift she'll never understand. Distance. Distance from your own dependency, from your emotional addictions, from your illusions about control. You start to see how much of love is about possession, how much of attachment is disguised fear. The mind loves to believe it was special, that it lost something rare. But truth doesn't need to flatter your feelings. Truth only cares about clarity. And the truth is this: if she could walk away, she was never yours, not truly. People don't leave what they feel connected to. They leave what no longer feeds their ego. And maybe your silence stopped feeding hers. Maybe your calm made her confront herself in ways she wasn't ready to. Some people only know how to love through chaos. Peace exposes them. When you stopped chasing, she lost her script. When you stopped explaining, she lost control of the narrative. And when you disappeared emotionally, she realized she could no longer pull your strings. That's why they often vanish, to regain power. But what they don't expect is that silence reverses the dynamic. It's the quiet revenge of the self-controlled. When you stop reacting, you become unpredictable. When you become unpredictable, you become powerful. And when you become powerful, they start to remember what they lost. But here's the paradox. By the time they remember, you no longer care. That's what growth feels like. It's not anger. It's not revenge. It's neutrality. It's the calm realization that you don't need them to validate your evolution. You outgrow the need to be seen because you've learned to see yourself. You stop performing strength and start embodying it. She didn't come back, but that no longer defines your story. Because strength isn't about getting them to return. It's about not needing them to. The kind of man who waits is still tied to outcome. The kind who grows is already free. Silence teaches you that difference. You begin to detach from the idea of control, not out of defeat, but out of understanding. You understand that people are not possessions, they are experiences. Some come to awaken you, some come to wound you, and some come to reveal the power you forgot you had. She belonged to the last kind, And in her absence, you learned one of life's most valuable lessons. That solitude isn't loneliness, it's liberation. The pain of being alone transforms into the peace of being complete. You realize you never truly miss the person. You miss the version of yourself that existed with them. You miss who you were allowed to be in their presence. But when that illusion breaks, you face your real self. And he's stronger, quieter, more grounded. The silence becomes your ally, not your punishment. It becomes the space where your emotions settle and your mind regains clarity. You start to understand that silence doesn't mean nothing is happening. It means everything essential is happening beneath the surface. It's where strength is reborn. That's when you start noticing subtle shifts. You no longer chase validation. You no longer react to being ignored. You no longer need to prove you've moved on, you simply have. The world senses it, and strangely, people become drawn to you again. Because strength has an aura. It's not loud, but it's magnetic. People sense when you're not trying to impress them. They sense when you're grounded in something they can't shake. That's the paradox of power. When you stop seeking it, it starts emanating from you. She didn't come back, but that was never the point. The point was you came back to yourself. The person you lost while trying to keep her interested. The part of you that was silenced every time you compromised your dignity to avoid being alone. You begin to feel a quiet pride, not in arrogance, but in awareness. You survived something you thought would destroy you. You turned pain into perception. You turned absence into strength. And that transformation, though invisible to others, changes the way you walk, speak, and see the world. You no longer beg for closure. You create it. You no longer wait for apologies. You forgive in silence. You no longer chase people. You attract peace. And peace is what power feels like when it's mastered. She didn't come back, and you stopped looking back. Because what once felt like loss became the foundation of your calm dominance. You learned that emotional control isn't repression, it's sovereignty. You no longer drown in emotion, you observe it. You no longer argue with silence, you speak it. And through that stillness, something awakens in you. The understanding that what leaves your life takes only what was never meant to stay. Everything else, everything essential, remains. You, your focus, your dignity, your quiet. The kind of strength that doesn't announce itself, but is felt in your presence. That's the paradox you carry now. She didn't come back, but you did. And that's what matters. The day you stopped waiting was the day your strength became real. Not the kind of strength that posts quotes about resilience or pretends not to care, but the quiet, grounded kind that doesn't need to prove anything to anyone. You stopped looking at her absence as a story of loss and began to see it as a test of alignment. Life removes distractions in cruel ways. It takes from you the very thing you think you can't live without, just to see if you truly can. And when you can, when you finally realize that your peace is not attached to another person's presence, that's when power begins to settle in. It doesn't shout, it doesn't celebrate, it just arrives calmly, like a realization you always carried but never noticed. The truth is, she didn't come back because she wasn't meant to. People don't return when they were only sent as temporary lessons. You keep confusing endings with injustice, when they are really the proof of divine timing. What you call heartbreak is often the universe handing you the weight you must learn to carry alone. Because if you never learn to stand alone, you'll keep kneeling for those who treat your presence as optional. You start to see it clearly. She wasn't the one who broke you. You were the one who kept giving your power away. Every unanswered message, every moment you tolerated confusion, every time you waited for someone to decide your worth, that was you trading self-respect for hope. Hope is a beautiful poison when it's tied to someone who has already walked away. You tell yourself they might come back, that maybe one more silence will make them miss you, that maybe absence will change what closeness couldn't. But people rarely change because you wait. They change because life confronts them with loss, and by the time it does, you've already learned that you no longer need them. Detachment isn't born from anger, it's born from clarity, from realizing that no amount of emotional intensity can force alignment. You start to accept that connection and compatibility are not the same thing. Someone can make you feel deeply and still not be good for you. Someone can awaken your emotions but dull your purpose. Someone can feel magnetic but drain your energy. You start to understand that chemistry isn't a sign of destiny. It's often a mirror of your own unhealed chaos. What attracts you to certain people is the part of you that still needs to learn balance. She mirrored something in you, the part that wanted to be chosen, and when she left, she didn't destroy you. She exposed what was unhealed. That's why the pain lingered, not because she was unique, but because she represented a part of your identity. When that version of you began to dissolve, your ego mistook it for heartbreak. But ego always grieves illusions louder than truth. You thought you missed her, but what you really missed was who you believed you were when she looked at you. And when that mirror shattered, you had to rebuild your reflection from something stronger: solitude. At first, solitude feels like exile. It confronts you with every shadow you've avoided. You feel your insecurities louder. You replay conversations that don't matter. You attach meaning to silence that has none. But over time you realize something profound. Solitude isn't punishment, it's purification. It burns away the false connections and reveals the essence of who you are when no one else's attention sustains you. You learn to sit with your own thoughts without needing an audience. You learn to be enough without reassurance. And that shift changes everything about your energy. You stop chasing, you stop explaining, you stop performing emotions to be understood, and slowly, power begins to return. The kind of power that makes people sense they can't manipulate you anymore. That's the hidden advantage of heartbreak. It recalibrates your emotional boundaries. Once you've been broken by someone you trusted, you become far more selective about who gains access to your peace. Your tolerance for inconsistency dies. Your attraction to chaos fades. You start craving simplicity, stability, silence. You no longer want intensity. You want balance. You no longer seek validation. You seek understanding. That's the mark of growth, when what used to excite you now feels beneath your new standard. She didn't come back, not because you weren't worthy, but because her presence belonged to an older version of you. The man she knew no longer exists. You've evolved beyond her reach. She wouldn't even recognize you now, not because you've become colder, but because you've become calmer. And calmness intimidates those who live in emotional turbulence. That's why some people vanish when you find your peace. They can't feed off your energy anymore. They confuse your silence with arrogance because they can no longer control the rhythm of your emotions. But that's not arrogance. It's mastery. You've learned that control isn't about dominating others. It's about not letting others dominate your inner world. You start to feel a quiet satisfaction when things that once triggered you no longer do, when her name no longer stings, when the memories stop demanding attention, when the mind releases its obsession with closure. That's when you realize you've healed, not because you've forgotten, but because remembering no longer hurts. You don't erase the past, you integrate it. You keep the lesson, not the attachment. And that lesson changes your approach to everything: relationships, power, purpose. You become more strategic with your energy. You no longer overinvest in potential. You value consistency. You no longer chase validation. You cultivate self-respect. You no longer explain your silence. You protect it. Because silence has become your currency. You use it to observe, to analyze, to maintain control. You realize that words are cheap, but energy never lies. You begin to communicate less and influence more. People feel your presence before you speak. They sense the restraint behind your calm. That's what makes you powerful, your ability to remain composed in situations designed to provoke you. That's how detachment becomes attraction. You stop giving away your reactions and people become drawn to the mystery of your control. They can't read you, and what can't be read becomes irresistible. You start to understand the psychology behind it. The human mind desires what it cannot predict. When you stop being predictable, you stop being ordinary. When you stop seeking attention, you start commanding it. Your silence becomes a gravitational field. Those who once overlooked you begin to wonder what changed. They project meaning onto your absence. They imagine stories about your indifference. And without realizing it, you flip the dynamic. You no longer orbit around their approval. They orbit around your mystery. But the difference is, you no longer care whether they do. Your focus has shifted inward. Your energy is no longer leaking through emotional wounds. You've become whole. That's what true detachment feels like. It's not numbness, it's balance. It's when love no longer equals weakness, and silence no longer equals loss. You start to see how power and peace coexist. You understand that real strength doesn't require distance from emotion, it requires discipline within it. You can still feel deeply, but you don't drown. You can still care, but you don't chase. You can still love, but you don't lose yourself. That's the lesson her absence taught you. Never give someone the power to destroy your balance, because once your emotions become self-regulated, your energy becomes unstoppable. That's when people start to return. Not because they love you more, but because your silence makes them confront their own emptiness. They sense something in you they lost, the peace they once took for granted. But by then, your silence isn't punishment, it's protection. You don't respond to old energy with old habits. You don't reopen doors that you had to heal to close. You've learned that peace is expensive, and you're no longer willing to trade it for temporary attention. She didn't come back, but she left something priceless behind. A version of you that no longer bends to the weight of uncertainty. You became stronger, not by becoming heartless, but by becoming whole. That's the true reward of loss. You stop needing the world to understand you because you finally understand yourself. And once you understand yourself, no one's absence feels like emptiness anymore. It feels like space. Space to grow. Space to breathe. Space to build something unshakable. The silence that once hurt now sustains you. It's not emptiness anymore. It's energy. It's the quiet proof that you've mastered what most people spend their lives avoiding. Being alone without feeling lonely. That's the kind of strength that doesn't fade. That's the kind of silence that commands respect. There comes a moment, after the storm of heartbreak has passed, when silence stops being a defense mechanism and becomes your natural state. It's not forced, not an act of pride or strategy anymore. It's peace. The kind of peace that comes from seeing everything clearly, without distortion or hope's interference. You begin to understand that control isn't about suppressing emotion, but about mastering its timing. You no longer need to respond instantly to what disturbs you, because you've learned that silence always reveals what words conceal. When she left, you thought silence was the absence of connection. Now you see it as the presence of control. The difference is monumental. It's what separates those who react from those who lead. You begin to live slower but deeper. Every thought feels deliberate. Every movement carries intention. You are no longer chasing moments, you are observing them. The same things that used to trigger you now become opportunities to practice mastery. You stop being addicted to drama because you've seen what peace feels like. And peace, once tasted, ruins the appetite for chaos. You look back at how much you used to give away. Your attention, your time, your emotional energy. You realize that emotional control is not about coldness but conservation. It's the art of knowing what deserves your energy and what deserves your silence. You no longer explain yourself to people committed to misunderstanding you. You no longer seek closure from people who benefit from your confusion. You stop trying to make others see your worth because you finally see it yourself. That's when your silence starts to speak louder than your presence ever did. People sense when your energy changes. They can feel when your peace is no longer for sale. They start to test your boundaries subtly at first, old conversations, nostalgic messages, small provocations. But you've changed. The man who once reacted with emotion now responds with composure. The man who once feared losing people now values losing the wrong ones. That shift terrifies those who once held power over you. Your calmness exposes their chaos. Your lack of reaction reveals their dependency. And in that realization, you reclaim dominance. The power dynamic reverses without you lifting a finger. Because the one who needs the reaction always has less control. That's the silent architecture of power. Stillness as leverage. You stop explaining your silence because you know silence itself is communication. It says, I'm not playing the game anymore. It says, I no longer need to be understood to have peace. It says, I've evolved beyond this conversation. And when people sense that, their instinct is to chase what they can't decode. That's why silence confuses the insecure and intrigues the intelligent. It forces both to face themselves. You start noticing how people interpret your calm differently. Some think you're arrogant. Some think you're broken. Some think you've moved on. The truth is simpler. You've become aware. You've stopped mistaking noise for connection. You've stopped giving access to those who drain your focus. And that awareness becomes your new form of attraction, because when you detach from needing attention, your energy becomes rare. Rarity is irresistible in a world addicted to validation. You become the person others project their desires onto, because they can't easily read you. The less you reveal, the more they imagine. The more they imagine, the more power you gain. But here's the irony. You no longer want to use it. True strength no longer seeks to dominate. It simply stands firm. You've reached a stage where you can love without attachment, give without expectation, and walk away without resentment. That's emotional sovereignty. You no longer fall in love with potential. You fall in love with peace. You no longer confuse excitement with connection. You look for alignment. You no longer stay to be understood. You stay to be respected. That's the transformation her absence initiated. She didn't come back, but your self-control did. You no longer crave the drama that once made you feel alive. You crave the quiet that makes you feel grounded. You stop trying to prove you've moved on. You live like it. And when she notices, because eventually she will, she won't recognize the energy she once knew. She'll remember your old patterns, the emotional availability, the constant reassurance, the way your silence once meant hurt. But this time your silence will mean strength. You won't be ignoring her out of pain. You'll simply be uninterested in chaos. You won't be distant out of pride. You'll just be protecting your peace. You won't be cold. You'll be composed. And that composure, that emotional stillness, will speak louder than any words ever could. Because nothing haunts the unhealed like someone who found peace without them. You'll notice the shift when they start to reappear. A message here, a like there, subtle attempts to re-enter your orbit. But you'll also notice that your heart doesn't react the same way. The nostalgia feels empty, the connection feels foreign. It's not bitterness, it's evolution. You've outgrown the version of yourself that needed them. That's what emotional control does. It doesn't erase memory, it redefines it. You start to see that every heartbreak was necessary. Every silence had purpose. Every rejection redirected you toward a deeper understanding of power. You understand now that power is not in control of others, it's in control of yourself. When you master that, everything external becomes secondary. Your emotions become tools, not tyrants. Your silence becomes strategy, not suffering. Your peace becomes your greatest flex. You start to embody what most people only talk about, self-possession. The ability to belong entirely to yourself, without the need to be validated, understood, or loved by anyone else to feel complete. That's the kind of man who intimidates the world, not because he's ruthless, but because he's free. Freedom terrifies those still ruled by emotion. It exposes their lack of control. That's why some people will try to provoke you even when you've done nothing. They'll project their chaos into your calm because your silence mirrors their lack of it. But you won't engage. You've learned that reacting means surrendering energy, and you no longer surrender anything easily. You conserve your words. You conserve your focus. You conserve your peace, because every time you give it away, you weaken your foundation. You've learned that silence isn't always about others. It's about maintaining your internal equilibrium. It's about being so centered that no external force can destabilize you. That's the highest level of strength, to remain calm not because nothing happens, but because nothing controls you. She didn't come back, and that's what allowed you to reach this point. Her absence forced you to meet your highest self, the one who doesn't chase, doesn't beg, doesn't crumble. The one who observes life with detachment, participates with intention, and withdraws with dignity. That's what heartbreak was trying to teach you all along. How to stop needing permission to be at peace. You no longer seek closure because you embody it. You no longer fear silence because you understand it. You no longer desire control because you've become it. And in that stillness, you find something far more valuable than love. You find respect for yourself, the kind that doesn't fade, doesn't depend, doesn't fluctuate, the kind that radiates from the inside out, quiet but undeniable. That's the essence of power. Not dominance, not manipulation, but mastery. The power of being unmoved in a world addicted to reaction. The power of calm in the face of chaos. The power of walking away without explanation. She didn't come back, but your silence turned the loss into legacy. Every moment of pain became part of your composure. Every unanswered question became part of your wisdom. Every ignored message became part of your discipline. You no longer crave revenge or validation. You crave understanding. Because once you understand, you're free. And once you're free, no one can use your emotions against you again. That's the true transformation of heartbreak. From reaction to realization, from noise to silence, from loss to power. Something happens when your silence stops being emotional and starts being energetic. It changes the entire way people perceive you. You no longer walk into rooms trying to be noticed. The room simply notices. It's not what you say, it's the calm behind your eyes, the lack of urgency in your presence, the quiet control in your movements. When you stop needing attention, you start commanding it. People feel the difference. They can sense when a person has detached from external validation. It's unsettling to them because most of the world survives on being seen, liked, and affirmed. But you've crossed that invisible threshold, the point where peace matters more than attention, and solitude feels richer than validation. You carry yourself differently now. You're no longer driven by reaction, but by observation. You notice how people try to provoke emotion to feel significant, how they bait with curiosity, manipulate with charm, or provoke with silence, but you no longer take the bait. You've learned that responding to manipulation is a silent agreement to play a game you've already outgrown. So you simply stay still, and that stillness does what words cannot. It disarms. The more you master silence, the more people reveal themselves around you. Silence isn't passive, it's diagnostic. It shows you who's genuine and who's pretending. It exposes insecurity. It reveals patterns. So that makes people uncomfortable because it removes the noise they hide behind. When you no longer fill the gaps, their masks start to crack. That's why powerful people speak less. They observe reactions more than words. Silence gives you access to truth, and truth gives you power. You notice it everywhere now. In relationships, in friendships, in the way people try to fill the voids you no longer rush to fill. The ones who once took your attention for granted begin to sense the withdrawal. They start wondering what changed, what you're thinking, whether you still care. They replay your old behavior in their mind, trying to map the difference. They remember the version of you that was emotionally available, predictable, expressive. But that version of you no longer exists. You've evolved into stillness. Stillness is unsettling because it doesn't give away motive. People don't know if you're indifferent or evolved, if you're healing or testing them. That mystery shifts the balance of power. You've stopped broadcasting your emotions, and now they project theirs onto your silence. They start imagining meanings that don't exist. That's when you realize the deepest truth of power. People don't fear what they understand. They fear what they can't interpret. Your silence becomes a mirror, and they can't stand what it reflects. It forces them to confront their insecurity, their guilt, their ego. They start to sense that they no longer control the rhythm of your emotions, and that realization disturbs them. Because control thrives on predictability, and you've become unpredictable. You've become someone who no longer reacts from emotion, but from awareness. And awareness is the highest form of control. You move with precision. You choose your words carefully. You allow people to reveal their intentions before you decide how to respond. You stop chasing explanations because you've realized that truth reveals itself with time, not effort. That's what silence gives you. Time. Space to think, space to see, space to detach from illusions before they consume you. You stop overanalyzing every detail of people's behavior. You accept inconsistency for what it is, data. You no longer romanticize potential. You measure patterns. You no longer interpret mixed signals as mystery. You recognize them as immaturity. And that emotional discernment is the real product of pain. Pain forced you to analyze. Silence forced you to understand. Together, they built the architecture of your composure. You've learned to see emotional energy the way others see currency. You invest it only where there's return. You don't waste it on proving your worth or defending your peace. You no longer argue about your intentions. You let your silence be the filter. The people meant for you will understand your stillness. The ones who aren't will mistake it for distance. And you're fine with that because misunderstanding is a small price to pay for peace. The irony is that once you stop needing people to understand you, they start wanting to. That's how influence works. It's not created through explanation, but through restraint. People crave what they can't access. When you were emotionally transparent, you gave them everything. Your thoughts, your motives, your fears. Now they only have questions, and questions create fascination. Your silence becomes a gravitational pull. It doesn't chase, it attracts, it doesn't explain, it compels. You stop performing strength and start embodying it. That embodiment changes how others behave around you. They speak more carefully. They watch their tone. They hesitate before crossing boundaries, because power is never about aggression. It's about emotional control. The one who controls their reactions controls the room. You've started to see this in subtle ways. The same people who once dismissed your silence as weakness now interpret it as confidence. The same people who once tried to provoke you now seek your approval. The same ones who thought you needed them now compete for your attention. That's how power reveals itself, not in dominance, but in detachment. Detachment reconfigures every dynamic. It turns rejection into revelation, loss into leverage. It teaches you that you never needed to force outcomes, only to align your energy. When your internal world is balanced, your external world begins to reflect it. Opportunities flow more naturally, conversations feel lighter. You stop attracting chaos because chaos no longer finds familiarity in you. The frequencies don't match. That's what emotional control does. It changes your energetic signature. You become unshakable not because life stops testing you, but because you stop reacting to every test. You've seen enough to understand that not every reaction deserves expression. That's how you maintain composure even when misunderstood. You no longer rush to clarify intentions. You let time reveal truth. And that patience unnerves those who live in urgency. Because urgency is the opposite of control. It's the language of the insecure. Calm people make the world uncomfortable. They move with purpose, not pressure. They know when to act and when to wait. They know that silence can achieve what confrontation cannot. You've learned that you don't always win by speaking. You win by outlasting. Some battles end not because you defeated anyone, but because you refused to play. That's what peace gives you, the ability to step away without needing victory. She didn't come back, but the lessons she left behind shaped a version of you she could never have built. You became the man who doesn't need closure to move on, attention to feel worthy, or chaos to feel alive. That kind of man is rare, and rarity commands respect. Not through fear, not through dominance, but through presence. A quiet presence that speaks of boundaries, self-awareness, and restraint. People start to feel your strength in the way you don't rush to fill silence. They realize that your stillness isn't emptiness, it's control. You've learned to use time the way others use words, to create effect without effort. You've learned to wait without tension, to walk away without guilt, to love without losing yourself. That's the essence of psychological power, to stay connected but not dependent, to feel deeply but not drown, to care without craving. You no longer need to prove your worth in relationships or arguments. You've transcended that game. Your silence speaks it for you. I know who I am. I know what I offer. I know what I will never chase again. And that awareness, that quiet self-certainty, is what draws people now. They don't come for validation. They come for the calm. Because calm has become your magnetism. They come to feel what you found in solitude. And the ones who can't handle that calm, they fade away like echoes of your old life, replaced by those who match your new frequency. You begin to attract people who value depth over drama, presence over promises, energy over words. Because that's what your silence has taught you to recognize, substance. The noise of the world no longer seduces you. You live at a different rhythm now, one that moves slower but sees further, one that doesn't chase but allows. You understand finally that she didn't come back because the lesson was never meant to be repeated. It was meant to be learned. She taught you silence, but you turned it into strength. She taught you absence, but you turned it into presence. She taught you loss, but you turned it into leverage. That's how transformation works. It's quiet, internal, and irreversible. There comes a point when you stop asking why she left and start understanding why she couldn't stay. Not because you were unworthy, but because your evolution required solitude. Some lessons are too heavy to be learned in company. You needed silence not as punishment, but as preparation. The person you've become could only emerge in the absence of noise, distraction, and emotional dependence. The same emptiness that once terrified you became the ground where discipline took root. What once felt like loss was simply transformation, disguised as loneliness. You start to see the symmetry in it, the poetic cruelty of life removing what you thought you needed, so you could finally meet who you were meant to become. It's not personal, it's necessary. Growth always demands a shedding, and when you resist that shedding, you suffer. When you accept it, you rise. She didn't come back because her role in your story ended. You were meant to evolve beyond her understanding, to reach a level of silence she couldn't comprehend. People who feed on emotional noise can't breathe in calm air. That's why they leave. And that's why you stay. You stay where stillness lives, because that's where strength is born. You don't seek revenge. You don't hope she sees your glow up. You don't fantasize about her regret. That's surface-level healing. You've gone deeper. You've reached the level where you no longer need acknowledgement to validate your transformation. You've learned that power doesn't need witnesses. It just is. You no longer crave to be understood. You crave to understand. You analyze patterns, not people. You recognize that every heartbreak follows the same rhythm: attachment, dependency, illusion, disillusion, awakening. And if you're wise, you use the pain not to close yourself off, but to open yourself up, to clarity, to truth, to strength. Because the final stage of power isn't detachment, it's serenity. Serenity means you can feel deeply without losing control. You can love without expectation. You can forgive without reopening wounds. That's the quiet summit of mastery, to move through the world untouched by its turbulence, connected but not consumed. You look back now and see that the version of you who once waited for her would never have survived this stage of power. He needed to die for you to be reborn. That's the secret most people never learn. You don't heal to get them back. You heal to never need them again. You don't rise to prove something. You rise because you refuse to fall again for the same illusion. Every unanswered text, every night spent overthinking, every silence that felt unbearable, it was all part of the training. You were being trained in restraint, discipline, patience, and observation. Emotional endurance is the gym of the soul. You were lifting the weight of detachment, building the muscle of control. And now you stand differently. You carry yourself with a calm authority that can't be faked, the kind of composure that comes from surviving what used to destroy you. You've learned that silence is not about ignoring others, it's about honoring yourself. It's about not giving chaos the satisfaction of a reaction. It's about knowing that your peace is the final word in every argument. Silence doesn't need to defend. It defines. It defines your strength, your boundaries, your evolution. The world will keep testing you. You'll meet new people, face new attachments, encounter new versions of the same temptation to lose yourself in someone else. But this time, you'll move differently. You'll listen more than you speak. You'll observe before you trust. You'll detach before you depend. Not out of fear, but out of awareness. You understand that power lies not in isolation, but in selective connection. You no longer open your energy to everyone. You treat it like currency, spent only where there's growth, not depletion. You recognize manipulation faster. You sense emotional instability before it entangles you. You know that words are temporary, but patterns are permanent. That insight is the reward of your silence. It trained you to see what noise used to hide. You've stopped trying to fix people who enjoy their brokenness. You've stopped seeking closure from those who thrive on confusion. You've stopped needing to explain your peace to those still addicted to chaos. You live now with a kind of detached empathy. You can care without carrying. You can understand without absorbing. That's maturity. That's mastery. You don't need to prove your growth to anyone because it's felt in your energy. The way you pause before reacting. The way you maintain calm when provoked. The way you choose absence instead of arguments. That's the final power. When you no longer need control because you've become control. You stop fearing solitude because you've made it sacred. You stop fearing endings because you see them as transitions. You stop fearing loss because you know everything temporary only refines what's permanent. Your self-respect, your composure, your silence. You realize now that she was never the destination. She was the catalyst. She awakened the parts of you that still needed healing. She mirrored your insecurities so you could transcend them. Her absence became the map back to your center. That's the hidden law of detachment. What leaves you doesn't take peace, it takes dependence. Once dependence is gone, peace returns. That's why your energy feels lighter now. That's why your silence feels alive. You're no longer waiting for anyone to come back. You've outgrown that desire. You've stepped into a realm where the only validation that matters is internal. You've turned silence into art, solitude into strength, and loss into leverage. The man who once waited now walks forward. The heart that once broke now beats with precision. The voice that once explained now observes in calm awareness. You've become what she could never understand, a man who doesn't need to be chosen to feel complete. That is the kind of strength that cannot be taken, only felt. It radiates through your restraint, through your eyes, through your composure. It's not arrogance, it's certainty. The kind that comes from knowing you faced yourself and didn't look away. She didn't come back, and that's why you became powerful. Because power isn't given, it's reclaimed. Reclaimed from illusion, from emotional slavery, from the need to be seen to exist. You've reached the point where silence isn't just strength, it's identity. You live it, breathe it, carry it like armor and aura. People feel it when they meet you. They sense it in your timing, your stillness, your gaze. You no longer rush to fill space because space itself has become your ally. You let others talk, project, assume, and you remain centered. That's when you realize the truth you were always meant to learn. Silence isn't the absence of power. It's the proof of it. And when you master that truth, the world bends differently around you. People respect what they can't provoke. They follow what they can't shake. They admire what they can't define. You've become that presence, not loud, not desperate, not reactive, just quietly unmovable. And that's what real power looks like, not noise, not control, not revenge, just stillness that cannot be disturbed. If this truth resonates, it's because you've already started to wake up. Subscribe, because real power doesn't shout. It whispers.